Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm Heather. Welcome to,
Go ahead, Heather.
oh,
Sorry.
okay. This is Ever So Clever Conversations with Amy and Heather. We're the experienced empaths, and we guide empaths through turbulent times so they can bloom.
Yeah, it is kind of turbulent these days, you guys. Let's face it. Heather and I are both empathic and intuitive. And today is episode 2, and we're really going to focus on how or what percent of empaths and intuitives are introverted and extroverted. And before I pass it over to Heather again, I just want to define what we say empathic is, or not empathic, extrovert and introvert. Introverts are people who gain energy by being alone, and extroverts are people who gain energy by being out with others. So I'll pass it to you, Heather, and tell us the percentage.
Yes. And first off, empaths and intuitives are commonly sensitive persons. So just so you have awareness around that. And then Dr. Elaine Aron wrote a book called Highly Sensitive Person, and she, in the book and in her studies, believes that 70% of highly sensitive persons are introverts. A highly sensitive introvert may come across as very observant, caring, emotional, and able to read others well, even though people exhaust them.
I think that's so funny. Even though people exhaust them.
Right?
You are exhausting.
We're exhausted all the time.
Well, it's important though for the extroverts and introverts to find that space, and we'll talk more in depth about that. But first, I want to kind of say, Heather and I had a discussion prior to having this conversation, just a little tiny one, and we both realized we are something that is the same, but we are neither an introvert or an extrovert. Heather, we are
an ambivert. So we're right in the middle, or we experience both sides.
And really what we've come to kind of from that is it's unique to each individual. Sometimes people say ambiverts are very lucky because they have both the the ability to be out and social and have this other ability, which is very nice. There's more flexibility in that to a degree. But as Heather and I will discover and share here, we have that innate trait differently. How it impacts us is different. So Heather, you want to tell us about how your ambivert shows up?
Yeah, so for me, I talk about that I can be around certain people and I enjoy being around certain people, but it's really based on the energy and group of the people. So I'm not one to go to like concerts and be around people I don't know. So I'm really more aware and feel off of whom I'm around. So that's that. Extroverted, like I like to be around people, but it's certain people and the people that I know I can feel their energy off. So that has led me to create my own groups of people or attract the right people for me. But then I also need, on the introverted side, I need quiet time. I need time when I do have a social event the next day. I usually take a day to recover. I like to be alone. I don't like to, I was talking about this earlier with Amy. I don't like if somebody just calls me and is like, hey, you want to go out tonight? I probably am going to say no. I usually need time to build up my energy and prepare to go out. I mean, if it's my husband and kids and we're like, let's go out to dinner, that's fine. But like emotionally and mentally and like I have to prepare for events. So it's harder for me to just go out. So that's probably more the introverted side too. But I think it's this balance between the two. And it can get, like you said, people might think it's great, but it can be confusing because you're trying to read yourself too. And I think what it is always tuning in to what you feel is the best for you, no matter introvert, extrovert, ambivert. Always listening to your intuition and what is best.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, Heather, that's a natural way to protect yourself too, by listening and really tuning into what works for your natural imprint of how you show up as an extrovert, introvert, or ambivert. For me, it is a bit the opposite. where I like being in places with lots of people busy. I like being on a stage with a lot of people listening. That is thrilling to me, and I enjoy the energy of all of that. And I wouldn't say I come home and I have to decompress. I would say sometimes small group situations can be too much for me, and I feel like I want to not do that sometimes. I'm I have to be honest. But I do think, Heather, you mentioned something that's really key, is making sure you're being around those people who you really can feel good about, and that that's a match for your energy, so that you're kind of naturally protecting yourself. I think that's just super important in thinking about, how am I going to manage this as my own imprint and take care of myself, and know that I'm being good to what my innateness is, what my special edge with introversion and extroversion, because it's tricky. People are quick to judge introverts.
Yeah.
And with so many introverts in that highly sensitive category, there's a disparity in our world about like, oh, they're shy, or they're this, or there are a lot of labels and a lot of ways that heads that I think are not positive, when actually there's a lot of positivity that comes through being an introvert, a lot of introspection, and also listening to everybody, taking it in, and being able to recognize things that other people can't see. So it's both these traits, well, all three of the ways are very important aspects of being a human. I think it's important to recognize that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was called as a child, was shy and timid. And to this day, I dislike the word shy. And I would not, when people would make that comment to my kids, it like made me cringe. Just because they didn't want to speak to a stranger or whatever the situation was, did not mean they were shy. So to me, that word, because I heard it so often, being just myself being described that way, I just dislike that word. But not that it's a bad word, it's a way of describing somebody that is more quiet and reserved, I guess. And we are observers, so that's where I feel like, too, the introvert side of me is, I usually do sit back and observe situations. And I don't just speak to speak. I usually speak when I have something that I feel I need to say, or that is important to say.
Yeah. Right. I think you're right there, because people that are introverted need to rise with more passion to be willing to say it too.
Yeah.
And I think shyness has taken on or developed a tone of unwillingness. And I think that, oh, kiss your grandma on the cheek, or do this or that forcedness. And that's really tough on people who are introverted. And it can be tough on people who are extroverted. The person knows for themselves, and really relying on the child or the person to say, do you want to give your grandma a hug? Or, and then the kid can kind of, okay, today I do. And tomorrow I might not. It might just be where they're at. They have too much energy built up and they need to decompress. And I think that's important about the highly sensitive too, is they have a different nervous system. So if you fall into that category, which truly most empaths and intuitives are likely to fall into the category of being the 20% of people in the population that are highly sensitive, and their nervous system is actually a different type of nervous system. And so that self-care to take care of that nervous system and decompress is really an important piece. And that's why for kids, or even other adults, if you have somebody in your life that's highly sensitive, to make room for them and kind of be like, if you need to cancel, that's okay. If they cancel all the time, you might have a conversation with them, but that really understanding that there is this innate need in them to figure that out, and they can't just go, which sometimes the extroverts can.
Right. And they seem to get energized off of that, of being around the other people. So I could see how that would be a challenge if you're married to an extrovert and you're an introvert. Like, I could see how that would be challenging to people. I feel like my husband has a balance, so maybe he's an ambivert too. I'm not sure, because he loves to be around people, and he was like the class clown in school, and but then I see the quiet, reserved, kind of wanting to be alone, that side of him as well. So I'm not sure, but he understands that in me for sure and supports that in me. So like, I take a rest if I'm napping, he knows. He doesn't be like, why are you always taking a nap? He just lets me be.
That's another huge consideration, is having an advocate that understands to take the nap or follow what you need. It's okay. And sometimes I think more as women, we need the permission. It's okay. it's okay
Wow.
to stay home. I know I had talked about an event I went to or was going to go to a week ago, and I chose not to go. We were working on some massive projects in our house. I was tired, and I stayed home and I did a bunch of projects while they were gone. Like I cleaned the garage, I did all this stuff, but I did take some time out for me too. And the next day we were just back into the project, lots of stuff to get done. And I felt so much better for just having time and space home alone for a little bit and making sure that I was filled up. And it was a hard choice. You know, it's like, well, do you go and be with family or do you choose not to? And I thought I just need to be by myself and not have other people's energy around me. Just that simple thing. It seems so silly, but it, you know, with COVID, it's been a long time since we've been home alone, I think, because
Right.
everybody's home or most, you know, yeah, so it's different.
When I think for women, we often have guilt too. So if we decide to stay home, like for me, there's times where I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this for myself. And then there's a lot of guilt behind it.
Yeah.
Once I do whatever it is, I feel like, oh, I should be home. I should be. And my kids are older, so they can function just fine without me. But there's always that mom guilt, or women just seem to have that guilt. Um, so it's like, it is okay. And having others give you permission, or giving yourself permission. Like, it is okay. It's needed. It's part of self-care
Yeah.
to do those things for yourself.
Yeah. I agree. I think, you know, Heather, I want you to tell about your daughter and
Oh,
that story. I think that's an important one to share.
yeah. So, well, my daughter now, she's 20, but when she was in preschool and we had one of our, initial meetings, they said when Ellie would walk into the room, if they were already in a circle, all the kids were already in a circle, she would not approach and sit down with the other kids. She'd have to be asked to join. So, like, come on over and sit with us. So I believe that's part of, well, all of probably being an empath and an introvert. Because I think she could sense everything, and maybe she wanted to observe, I'm not sure. But not somebody that just jumps in and is like, hey, I'm here, and would run down and sit with the kids. It was like, it had to be like, come join us, that invitation.
Boy, a lot comes to mind when you say that right now. I think, you know, one of the thoughts that I have is somewhat to me that falls into intuition, because the connections are closed. Like they've already come to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I enter in that? Because the connection isn't naturally there. Whereas some kids wouldn't look for something intuitive like that. They just run into the circle and push kids aside and be like, here
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting conundrum. There's something I want to say about that too, that I don't know much about this, but human design identifies that a little bit, that there's a certain attribute in human design when you do your chart where in life you have to be asked to do something or asked in. And I kind of wonder if that's something going on there too, because then if you aren't asked and you just join in, if you have that attribute, it doesn't work out for you. You know, things won't work out. So I'm like, that's a really interesting idea. But then
Yeah.
I shared too in a conversation another time, but that I have a daughter who she was the opposite in preschool, although she is also highly introverted. She spent most of her childhood in her room with the door closed, which was appropriate for her. But at preschool, she got up from circle time the first day she was there, and they were like, okay, it's time to play. And she started in the middle of the year, so that was kind of awkward too, right? But she stood up and she started running away to the thing she wanted to do. And then she turned back. She's like, come on, guys, let's go. You know, and that's her penchant, is she's programmed a little more like me, where being out in that big arena with a lot of people is where her extrovert shines. But then she just wants to be by herself, you know, the rest of the time. So
Right.
it's interesting how it shows up.
It is so interesting. And seeing that already in the two of them in preschool, we have these two different stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you can start to see that innate coding of how they're introvert, extrovert, how that piece works for them.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, and something with Ellie too is she had a hard time, like if other girls were talking with this was even in daycare, it came up.
Oh.
Daycare was before preschool. So two girls were talking and they were talking about her, she still talks about that. So I don't like almost like a grudge. I don't know if it's a grudge or like, I remember when, and these two, Tatum and I forgot the other girl, were talking about me, and maybe they even weren't, who knows, but in her mind, she created that, and she can still remember that situation. So she wasn't invited into those two people's friendship, and she felt so excluded, you know, and she still can remember that.
You
I
know,
shouldn't laugh, but at times we're like, wow, Ellie, that, you know, wow, that you still remember that.
right.
But that's kind of like, I think friendships for introverts, we really need deep relationships. They have to be very, like, I don't have a lot of friends. I have close friendships.
Yeah, I think the highly sensitive / empath / intuitive desire deep relationships,
Yeah,
ones that
yeah,
can be based on vulnerability. And
right,
when we don't have that, it's kind of a blood-sucking event, because to us, I think it feels more like everything is just about the surface, or sometimes it moves into arrogance, like it's all about that person, or, you know, and we're just like, that's not valuable to us. We want to know more. We want to know the depth. Like if you're sharing about yourself, we want to know the depth of you. And
right.
I know more than once I've gone home in the car kind of snippety about like, can't we, you know, have a deeper conversation? This is just surface stuff. It doesn't make any sense to want.
Right.
That's tricky, but
We do. I think we do want that and need that,
yeah.
really.
I think with Ellie too, though, Heather, I would say that um, one of the things, and I don't know if this is an American culture or it's where we live, or is we have to ask the question, what are you guys talking about? And why are you talking about me? And that's something I'm just doing some work in my community with a group for justice and so on. And that's one of the things that we've really come to, is this very much a need to shoot straight, even if it's, you know, this is going to get off topic a little bit, but I have a friend who went to the University of Minnesota and she was studying engineering, and she was scared. You know, she had not passed this one math class. It took her 3 times, and it was not a very high math class, and she had to go all the way in what she was studying. And she asked this group of students who were of a certain ethnicity, but they grouped together, can I be a part of your group? I need some study help, you know, and study guide or whatever, study group. Nope, you can't be here. Then she asked this other group and they said no. And I wish she would have said why.
Yeah.
Because if she had said why and they said, we don't think you can keep up with us, she could have said, then let me be in the group for 2 weeks. And if I can't keep up, I will happily leave. But there's the opportunity to go in and see. Otherwise,
Right.
we assume it might be prejudice, or we assume it might be, well, you're shut out. And maybe that is the case, but I would rather know that. Like, we don't want you here. So I think that part of our responsiveness to that being sensitive is we have to ask the question, even though that moves into that vulnerable state, which makes people who are extroverted or are not highly sensitive quite uncomfortable. They could become reactive. They could have a whole bunch of different types of ways that they respond to that. But I do think as a person who is empathic and intuitive, it is distressing, especially for a partner, to say, blah, 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 this stuff to you, and you can feel something completely different from their solar plexus area. And you're like, yeah, but what you're saying isn't how you feel.
Yeah.
And that's distressing to me, because I'm going to trust what you're feeling, not what you're thinking and saying. And so whether that's right or wrong, that might not be right to trust what they're feeling, because feelings are kind of sometimes not always, they could be bubbling up from someplace else. You never know. But I think that if we ask the good questions, we can get down to the root of it and help to understand and bridge that gap. Because that, I believe, the kids who are like her ruminate on it, because they're like, what happened there? There's no out. And the reason I think they do it is they're looking for connection. And that was about disconnection. So they're like, I still want that connection. And so they keep banging on the door of it to find out, how do I get that connection? And I really think it's being vulnerable and asking the question, what are you talking about? You. Well, why are you talking about me? Because we don't like you. Well, why do you not like me? Because your hair, you wear pigtails. Well, then she has a choice. Is she going to be herself and wear the pigtails, or is she not? Right? Frees her from knowing those kids are icky or the space.
And when you're saying that, to me, it feels being assertive, but in a good way. Like and where we live, it could be like you say, where we live, we're we're kind of be nice, but then it doesn't serve us at times because we're not assertive enough to ask or go further in the questions.
Right.
So we then assume things, because even Ellie will be like, don't assume that, Mom. And I'm like, I know, I create a story with, a situation, and it could be totally off, but that's my, assumption of what's happening. So I think that's really important, and it's really challenging for sensitive people to push things a little bit further. I think there's the vulnerability and not wanting to get hurt or feel another emotion,
right,
too.
But I think, sorry, Heather, I gotta cut you off.
Oh, I was gonna say, teaching our kids this or sharing them, allowing them to have the space to do that at a younger age.
And modeling it confidently as an adult too, or just if you are an adult and you don't have kids, just consider doing it, especially with people you can trust more than others, people who are close to you. And you can even say to them preemptively, I'm doing some personal work, and so I might do something that's different that you haven't experienced with me, and I just want you to roll with it because I need to learn this. And friends that are close to you are going to be, oh, okay. I even had a friend of mine, she doesn't have her sight, but I call her insighted because she's so insightful. I'm like, oh my gosh. So she said once, now I've totally lost my train of thought, you guys. Okay, it'll come back.
Back, yeah.
I'm back.
Insightful. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm off of it. Totally lost it. So yeah, I do think asking the good question. Oh, that's what she said. Okay, there we go. I just have to start talking. She said, Amy, I tell people to sit down with their iPhone or their phone and ask their friends, can I record this conversation? Why? Because I'm doing self-development and I want to hear what I say. I want to hear how I react to you so I can change it. If I'm not being, like she's talking about being empowered.
Right.
That's brilliant, because then you can actually go back and listen again, especially like the specific example we've given here, that kid is replaying that again and again. So if they can go back and listen 6 months later and be like, oh, that's right, this is the way to do it. It helps them release themselves from that story and recognize going forward, they can change that. But it's tricky. And we have to stand up and say the thing. Even I wrote that down, Heather. I think that's really profound, that we're nice so we don't ask. And then we assume. And so I think we're really judgy where we live. But I don't think we want to judge each other. I think we're trying to fill in the inference or what we don't know.
Yeah.
And we don't.
Fill in the story, right? Or create a story. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
And I love that my kids will question me or call me out on it. Because then I go, you're right. And then I can think, I really don't know. That's what they're dealing with, or I don't know the situation of that person. But for some reason, it must be a way of us trying to, I don't know, adapt or something, that we just create a story in our head so we can justify or understand.
Yeah.
Because I'm someone that has to understand everything, or I need to get, I'll dig deep into things because I really want to know and understand it. And I'll get obsessive on words and what does this word really mean? And I'll dig in deep on it. And it's probably just this wanting of knowledge. And if I don't have it, it bothers me. So then maybe that's me filling it in for myself.
Well, I think you've brought us to something really important. And so I'm going to just say this, that I think a lot of introverts, and particularly people who are introverted and fall into that highly sensitive category or the empath intuitive, compensate a lot because they can't manage it or they can't handle it. And so they instead offset it and try and displace it with other things. That's where I think it's extremely important to recognize, I want to go to that family thing. I'm not capable of it today. I want to go camping with you and we planned this giant weekend and I can't do it. That if we're honest with that, we will actually start to align and restore that space for ourselves where the power becomes easier and easier and easier. But sometimes when we go too far and we've gotten too wrung out, it's going to be harder and harder for us to say, hey, this is what I need right now. And this is how it's got to work for me, and then the person can say, well, we're not going to do it that way. But then, well, then I'm going to make it work for me that way. And you can choose whatever else. I mean, at least then we have this power to separate the two situations and not, I think we're apt to please people because
Yeah.
first of all, we feel kind of different, right? Because we are actually different.
Right.
And then, we were over processing and I mean, there's just a whole host of things going on there. So to really be able to separate ourselves, and it's kind of a perfect storm. I mean, I was just listening to a conversation prior to this that kind of left me in this compelled state of, what they were talking about was social justice and equality. And what I'm listening to and hearing is a lot about narcissism and a lot about codependency. And I think, not that I'm saying, they're codependent and they're behaving that way, but I think it was really interesting because I feel like that is what we're trying to dismantle. And I think that for the highly sensitive, empath, intuitive, that narcissistic model is extremely destructive to who we are because it's so naturally contrary to the innate nature of who we are. And that's makes it really tricky. And I think it's a wonderful gift by which we get to learn, particularly if you're in our age group or in our 40s, but that's an opportunity. But I think it is also squeezing us hard because here are children of ours saying, you got to relook at that. And here was this message from the parents that was completely different. Suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, let that go. Don't be emotional. You're fine. That's okay. Overriding what is true. And that's the trick, I believe, for the empathic person and intuitive is that they really must align with their knowing. And so the more we let the world kind of take it out of us, the worse off we're going to be as far as empowering what we really need to say and how we really need to make that space for ourselves. And I'm living it daily. It's not like, oh gosh, I've got this figured out. It really is a journey.
Right.
It takes a lot of self-care on my part to keep me rolling at the pace at which I can, I know I can roll. So that's something to consider.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I can just remember back when I was really young, and if I would get hurt, like there's a situation where I got hurt by somebody, like they accidentally hurt my foot. And I did not I didn't say ow or like you hurt my foot. I just went silently and told my mom and started crying because my toenail then was starting to come off. But I did not want to make the other person feel bad. So even as a young child, I knew, like I held in the emotion. I didn't scream or cry. Like I held that all in on my own to protect that adult so that they would not know that they hurt me.
Right.
And I'm like, that is like some crazy stuff. And I'm sure, and it's a people pleasing type of thing. And it's a sensitive person type of thing. But I can see that then as you become an adult, that's something you carry forward too.
Right.
Like I don't want, so that's where I think the compensating piece, I don't want to hurt somebody else's feelings, but I would rather carry it myself like I did as a child, right?
Well, and Heather,
that's not good.
Yeah. Would you say too, you didn't want to draw attention to yourself when you're hurting?
Yeah. I didn't want to draw attention to myself because I didn't mind going and telling my mom and crying and having her, she actually comforted me. She has some narcissistic stuff, behavior, so Amy knows, which we can talk about another time. But I knew to go to her and she would comfort me, but she didn't draw attention either.
Yeah.
To the person, so it was like her and I just took that in. So I think it's interesting because you're right. It's attention. My kids don't like to draw attention to themselves. It's me I don't want that person to feel bad that they did that. So there's many things just from that one situation that I can see. And then that carries forward into my adulthood, how often I did stuff like that.
I think, another vulnerability of people who are empathic and intuitive is that if they get hurt from somebody else, they might feel like they actually have to take care of that other person and be responsible for their feelings and the way that they are. And that falls into codependency too, but I think that it's more I think a lot of it is because of that model and how we are structured in life right now. But but that's a problem. So it's almost easier to just scuttle off and deal with yourself than
Yeah.
have to deal with all the bigger picture, which is not necessarily the right situation. It's like that person should meet you and say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, how can I help? Right? But they might not. And the chances are pretty high based on how the culture is structured for them to be like, oh, I'm sorry, and then walk away. Versus,
Yeah.
oh my gosh,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
I already read that person at that time, even being 7 or 8. I think I could have read that person, and that person might have even turned it to blame to me.
Right. And I think that is part of that structure of that model as well, is that reverse blame situation, because you're a kid, and just the whole structure, the hierarchy, the whole thing going on, and that's we actively as empathic people, we need to dismantle that, because in essence, it's the greatest protection for our introvert and for our extrovert, is by having that clear boundary of, I'm the one that got hurt here. Now, a kid's not going to be able to say that, not in the day and age that we were getting raised either, but a kid can.
Yeah.
A kid can today. They can say, no, but that hurt me. So if you're not able to help me, then I just want you to know you hurt me. Like, they could have that ability. And I think
Right.
it's important to make sure our kids are encouraged to say, what is true for them, even if it seems not so nice.
Mhm. Well, I think that's what I've learned now over time as an adult. I need to change that pattern. And I'm still working on it, but I believe I've come a long way, so that my kids can see that they can. And I hold that space for them too when they want to speak, or so they know they're heard, because I didn't always feel that way.
Yeah.
So it is being that example. And if these things happen to us, just learning and trying to heal through that, for sure,
Right. And it
for
is,
all of us.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it is a lot to yield to our kids too, or yield to other people who are sensitive, and say, do it when you're ready, or if you don't want to, that's okay. Like, actually giving that clarification, that information, so that they can feel, because I think because of that model too, I don't think it's our innate nature, but I think we can tend to feel a lot of guilt and a lot of worry about, did I do that right? Or are they mad at me? Or are they upset? And it's a spiral of hell.
True.
Don't go on the hell spiral.
Perfectionist. Yeah, right. Don't go there. That's not a good place.
No.
Don't enter that one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
All right. Should we talk about our next?
Yeah, Heather, let's do it. So, you guys, we have these greater episodes, which we just shared here. And in a little short time, we're going to have everything worked out, but we want to make sure that we do all the things that we want to do for you before we launch the second part of what we're doing with these conversations. And Heather's going to share with us, though, what next week's theme is.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining on this conversation in Deeper with Amy and I. And next week, we'll be in our conversation 3. We'll be talking about the personal importance of personal connection for the empath and intuitive. So catch that next time.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
And thanks, Heather. It's been fun.
Thank you, Amy. Yep.
Okay.
All right.